Skull Rock Podcast is brought to you by the generosity of the following companies. Shure, sound extraordinary. To podcasters, recording musicians, and streamers who are looking for studio quality audio at home or on the road, the Shure MV7 Podcast Kit is a premium all-in-one solution inspired by the legendary Shure SM7B and is designed to address the versatility required by modern creators. For more on the Shure MV7 Podcast Kit, visit shure.com, SHURE.com, or click the link in our show notes. Shure, sound extraordinary. And by The Old Mill Press, publishing beautifully crafted books that illuminate our world. To learn more, visit theoldmillpress.com. And by listeners like you.
This is Animator Rebecca Reese, and you are listening to the Skull Rock Podcast.
Skull Rock Podcast, talking all things Disney, with your hosts Aljon Go and Dave Bossert.
Welcome to Skull Rock Podcast, the show about all things Disney and pop culture. Every week we take you behind the scenes of some of your favorite Disney films, theme park attractions, performances, books, music, as well as what's streaming, what's in theaters, and what's going on in this universe of entertainment. I'm Aljon Go, musician and longtime Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, and pop culturist. And you can email me, Aljon, ALJON, at skullrockpodcast.com.
And I'm Dave Bossert, artist, filmmaker, author, and welcome to the Skull Rock Podcast. If you love Disney and pop culture, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can also like and follow us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also email me at dave@skullrockpodcast.com. Aljon, we're back again, another week, another fantastic show. We've got animator, story artist, producer Joe Haidar, part one of a three-part interview. And Joe is one of these seasoned veterans, and I'm looking forward to getting to that.
I love it. Joe is such a great personality, and he's got such great stories. And I can't wait to delve into it with Joe right here on the show today. Just part one, too. I mean, wow, cool stuff.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, Aljon, you know, our podcast is really getting a lot of reach out there because I got a really wonderful note from a fantastic animator, really one of the top animators I know, a guy named Chuck Gamage, who's up in Toronto. And we had a wonderful conversation this past week. Chuck and I caught up. It's been a number of years since we spoke. And I'm going to try and get him and some of the Canadian animation contingent onto the show because, you know, there's such a great animation community in Canada. And I was fortunate enough to work with a number of those folks when I was over in London many years ago, 35 plus years ago, working on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I met a bunch of Canadians. And then, you know, there's a bunch of, you know, Canadians that live in Los Angeles in the animation industry, you know, like Doug Bennett, who was on a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, no, that's great to get the contingent up here, trying to do some alliteration. But yeah, no, I can't wait. Those animators are super talented, and I know they have a host of stories to tell. I can't wait to delve into it with them.
Yeah, and I know Chuck is listening, so Chuck, I'm coming for you.
Watch out, you're on Dave's list. You're on the list. Well, Dave, how was your week? Everything good?
Yeah, it's just been a very, very busy time, Aljon. You know, there's just lots going on, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that after the interview. There's some things coming up that I think our listeners might be interested in hearing about.
Yeah.
But we got a jam-packed show. We got a lot of stuff to go over. You've had some cool things going on with Gibson.
Absolutely. You know, the music business continues to churn, and we as a company, for those of you not to know, I do work for Gibson Guitars, and we just opened up the Ultimate Guitar Experience, Dave. You know, we have a Gibson Garage Ultimate Experience here in Nashville, Tennessee, the Mecca in Music City. And people can check out the guitars and play all the guitars we make and customize their own guitars. There's a guitar bar there where people can build their own guitars basically and trick them out. And we have them pick the wood and everything. And a performance stage and a great lounge.
So wait a second now,
Yes.
John. You're telling me that so this is like an experience. This is like going into a museum, right?
Yeah, it's one part museum, one part venue, one part retail shop experience, and one part interactive experience.
Wow, that is
So
cool. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
there must be a ton of people that go through that every day.
it really is. It is the mecca. It's the flagship, and upstairs is my office. So you want to come
Wow.
see me during the week? It's right behind the Frist Art Museum in Nashville, in the heart of downtown Music City. And you get to see everything we make from replica guitars we make for John Lennon and Jimmy Page, or just your average guitar that you can take anywhere that I make for our brand. So yeah, and people can come and meet the guitar makers and sit down, have some sushi next door, and come over and check out the interactive experience that is Gibson Garage.
And you're telling me that somebody like a guitarist could walk in there and say, I want Gibson to make me a custom guitar.
Yes.
And I want a Les Paul, and I want this kind of wood on the neck,
Yep.
and I want this kind of a paint job and all of that.
Yes, we have a bar there that you can go in, and it's not like Apple Geniuses, but we do have our techs, and they go over there, our guitar techs and our shop pros, and they'll say, okay, Dave, so you want a Les Paul? Do you want it to look like Peter Frampton's? Okay, great. So you can, there's a wood bar that comes down from the ceiling, and you get to choose every billet of wood you can make for that guitar. You can choose the maple and the type of grade of maple and the type of heaviness of the mahogany. You can choose the gold hardware, the nickel hardware, different types of tuners you can put on it, and then we'll take out the different drawers, and you can pick whatever kind of electronics you want in it, and then we'll just write down everything, and we'll customize a quote for you, and we'll have it ready for you. So that's exactly how that makes.
Now, how long does it take to build a guitar?
Well, with Gibsons, it's very much done in a handcrafted way. It's very bespoke, so you're looking at probably a month of big special orders that require a lot of inlay and design, because we do that by hand as well. So let's say you wanted abalone butterflies in the fretboard. They are all hand engraved and hand done. So you could get one that's engraved, probably within 6 months or so. But it depends on how intricate you want it. I've had a friend of mine from New York who hosts a radio show. He came in and he wanted a abalone butterflies put in there to remind him of his mother. And it's all hand built and hand lacquered with like the nitrocellulose violin lacquer, which is kind of like Stradivarius violins.
Wow.
So that's the old world way that we do things at Gibson, because they're heirloom instruments. And so that guitar will sweeten the tone over time like a fine wine. And that guitar, took several months to make, but that's just how we do it. So Dave, you would love it because you're a woodworker too. So you love that stuff.
Yeah, and well, I'm going to make it to Nashville at some point. We're going to do a show together in person.
Yeah, we could probably do it at the Gibson Lounge. That would be great.
Maybe we should.
Yeah.
But not only is the Gibson Garage in Nashville, you're saying you opened one in London,
Yes.
and there's also a photography exhibition going on
so
there?
we opened one in London. And by the way, all those great guitar players from Jimmy Page. Yeah, Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin was there. Tony Iommi from Black Sabbath, and Brian May from Queen was there to help us open. And then we also have an art gallery there as well. It's the Jared Makowitz Gibson Gallery, and it's open now, so you can check it out. The Gibson Garage is located on 6162 East Castle Street in London, and it's open Monday through Saturday from 10 to 7 p.m., 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., and Sunday from 12 to 6 p.m. And Friday, March 8th, that's right around the corner, there's an In Conversation special event with Jared Mankiewicz and London's First Lady of Soul, P.P. Arnold, which will be there from 7:30 to 9:30. RSVP is required. And all of these great images, Mankiewicz took all the great pictures of Jimi Hendrix with him and the Band of Gypsies, took all these great photos of Joan Jett and Led Zeppelin. So there's tons of stuff, Oasis, Keith Richards and the Rolling Stones. I mean, he is literally one of the best rock and roll photographers in the world. So you get a chance to check that out. And for those of you interested in those type of gallery showings, the Gibson Garage in London is definitely the place to go. So
awesome. You'll put some links into the show notes.
absolutely. It's going to be there. Right. And I encourage our listeners over there across the pond to check it out.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Okay. So shall we get into some email?
Skull Rock Podcast.
All right.
Answers your email.
All right, Dave. So you got a few different notes this week. You've been on different shows.
Well, you know something, I got a nice note from Emily and Courtney, who do the Book of the Mouse Club podcast, and they're celebrating their 100th episode in March.
Wow.
So I did a nice little recorded message for them, and I just wanted to give a shout out to them. They're lovely people. Their podcast centers on Disney related books, and also a friend of the Skull Rock podcast, Chris Bannis and her crew. They're celebrating the 300th episode of the Grand Circle Tour podcast.
Wow.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Chris. You know Chris.
I do, and just shout out to Chris because she sent me a couple guitar pins, a guitar pin and a guitar ornament that she made. She's a great little artist, and thank you so much for that kind, warm gift. I mean, it's nice that we talk about guitars occasionally here from my work, but it's nice that she said that. So awesome.
Hey, it's part of pop culture.
It certainly is.
Come on. and when you talk in pop culture and you talk music, you can't help but talk about Gibson guitars, Ludwig drums.
That's right.
I mean, come on, right?
That's right. So you talk about Ludwig drums. Here's something for you. When I was studying to be a music teacher, Dave, I had William Ludwig Jr. actually sit in on my jury in music school when I went to the conservatory at Austin
Wow.
P. And from there on out, when I played my jury and everything for my sophomore year and went in there and played the snare, and I think I played a marimba piece as well, 4 mallets. William came in and was like, son, that was a great piece, but you just blew right through it. You need to take it slow like this. And he just started playing the snare drum like with all this power, and it sounded like a cacophony of just beautiful music coming from the snare drum. So musical. And I said, okay, you're right. And then I switched majors. I switched majors.
You know what? At least he didn't say don't quit your day job.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's just amazing. But anyway, yeah, Mr. Ludwig, of Ludwig drums. I mean, come on now. Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, that's great shout outs. I've got this email, Dave. Speaking of music, this is a music intensive part today. Email. I wanted to pass my thanks to you both for a wonderful podcast. I've recently discovered this podcast and have been enjoying it each episode I've listened to so far. While it's obviously theme park and Disney focused, I was pleasantly surprised this morning while listening to the episode discussing Mr. Bossert's recent book of The House of the Future. And while I'd settled in to hear about this new book, I was treated to a very well-informed diversion into the history of Van Halen. Though I'm a child of the 80s and have tremendous fondness for Diamond Dave and that era of Van Halen, I've grown and realized that one can appreciate both eras as they have their own comparative strengths. Thanks again for all you do and your informed discussion, and thank you for bringing up the Gary Cherone era. Thanks, Patrick.
That was nice. That's a nice email.
That was really nice. Yeah.
I wonder, do you know where Patrick was from?
I'm not really sure where Patrick is from the email, but next time, Patrick, send us an email and let us know where you're emailing us from. We'd love to.
Yeah, I mean, anybody who sends us an email, just let us know the general area you're in. I mean, because we love getting emails, and it's always great when we get emails from people in Taiwan or Germany or the UK or Australia or someplace, far-flung location around the globe.
Yes, and that's true. And I appreciate too, Patrick, that you're a Van Halen fan, and I am a huge Van Halen fan. And, going back to being a child of the 80s, I certainly was a child of the 80s. And I love that we talked about the We Are the World documentary on Netflix, the biggest night in music. And Van Halen was actually approached to be on We Are the World, but unfortunately they were on tour. So it didn't happen for them. And of course, in 1984, things kind of changed on their hiatus when Quincy Jones called Eddie Van Halen up to play the guitar solo for Michael Jackson's Beat It, which Eddie Van Halen did not get paid for, did not get credit for. because management and the band frowned upon doing any outside projects. So he did it absolutely for free, came in, recut that portion of Michael's record when he came into the studio. And in doing so, ruined the SMPTE code. And the guys from Toto had to like redo the entire backing track because he spliced the tape in order to change the arrangement. And Michael said, "Yeah, it sounded great." And then they realized that the track got off sync because they did it analog instead of the way they normally do it. So
Wow.
so there's a big story there, but Eddie thought it was completely a joke, and that Quincy had to call him several times to make sure that he knew it wasn't a joke, that it was really Michael Jackson calling. I didn't know if you knew that story or not, Dave.
I did not know that story.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a great one. But anyway, if you want to know more music trivia, I'm sure you can ask me about it. I can fish into that. I've been told that I shouldn't be part of any home rock and roll trivia Jeopardy games because I'll probably end up creaming the other team. But anyway, thank you so much for listening, Patrick. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. And now we have our, there we go. If I can get this going, our picks of the week. The sound effect did not go through for whatever reason, so let's pretend it did. Dave, what did you see this week?
Well, I got to tell you, I watched mostly the small screen. I didn't have a chance to get out to the theater this week, but next week I'll be back with a couple of movies. But on the small screen, I watched a show called Jack Irish, which is based on the Jack Irish novels by Peter Temple. And this is a series that was produced out of Australia. And it's shot on location in Melbourne. It stars Guy Pearce as a former criminal lawyer who works as a part-time investigator after his life implodes. And this is an incredible ensemble cast, I have to tell you, Aljon.
Okay.
Aside from Guy Pearce, it stars Marta Dusseldorp as Linda Hiller, and Aaron Penderson, who I've talked about before. He's in this. He's a Australian Aboriginal actor who is revered in Australia and a very popular guy. I've talked about him before because he was on a show called Mystery Road, which is another Australian show that I spoke about probably a month or so ago. But it's just a great ensemble cast. Each season 1, 2, and 3, each season has an arc of one story to the 6-episode series, season, I should say. So this is really fabulous. You can find it on Amazon Prime Video or on my new favorite streamer, Acorn TV. Nice. So there you have it. Jack Irish, excellent show. Another Australian show I've been watching is from 9 Network Australia. It's called The Heart Guy, and that's the international name for it. I don't know why they changed it, but in Australia, the series is called Dr. Doctor. And it stars Roger Corser as Hugh Knight. And after a sudden fall from grace, arrogant, high-flying heart surgeon Dr. Hugh Knight is forced to leave his hedonistic inner-city life to take a position as a local GP in the small country town where he was born. This is so smartly written. It's funny as hell in certain parts, and it's I would call this a dramedy because of just some of the fantastic dialogue. Also in this show is Haley McKinney. Tina Bursell as Meryl Knight, the mother of the Knight family. Nicole De Silva as Charlie, she's fabulous. Ryan Johnson plays her husband, Matt Knight, brother of Hugh. It's just a really fun show that I've been enjoying quite a bit. And again, some of these shows, Aljon, I'm discovering these just so that I could come back and tell our listeners about these, because these are shows that you might not normally find unless you stumble on them.
True.
You can find this. This particular show is on Prime Video. It's on the Roku channel. You can also watch it on Acorn TV. And then I've been watching episodes of the final season of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Right.
From Seinfeld co-creator Larry David, who plays a version of himself on this improvised series. This is just hysterical. Absolutely hysterical, this show. I don't need to tell you or most of our listeners who have seen episodes. Curb Your Enthusiasm is a fantastic show, period. And it's sad that this is in its last season. But there you have it. They're dropping. And then I watched a couple of episodes of Ghosts. Have you watched Ghosts?
I have.
Yeah, so season 3 has dropped or is dropping. I watched the first 2 episodes of season 3, and I love this show. I think it's a great ensemble cast led by Rose McIver as Samantha, and her husband Jay on the show is an up and coming chef. And they've both thrown caution and money to the wind when they decide to convert a huge rundown country estate they inherited into a bed and breakfast, only to find that it's inhabited by many spirits of deceased residents. Again, this is just a really fun show. It's actually on CBS, but I've been watching it on Paramount Plus.
Yes.
And, you know, of course, you can watch each episode as it drops every week on CBS for free. But I choose to watch it on Paramount Plus because it's without commercials. Yeah. So that's what I've been watching this week. What have you been watching?
You know, I have not watched a whole lot. It's been a crazy week for me, but I can tell you that I've seen a brand new limited series on Netflix called Can I Tell You a Secret?
It's just like a horror movie or something.
Well, it isn't. You know, show? It's another two. It's actually a 2-part, easy to watch documentary, and it's about someone that is cyber stalking these women on Facebook. So I don't know if you've been prey to this. I know some of our listeners may have, but you know, people can go online, especially on social media, and clone your account and hack you and basically try to befriend your circle of friends online and basically steal pieces of your information in order to ruin your life, to impersonate you, to do this. And so these young Instagram models, or what have you, there's several in this region of England, and they're all being cyber stalked by this one gentleman who has literally been doing scams like this for about a decade. And it's basically about how he's ruined these women's lives, stalks them, makes them feel unsafe, and how authorities fall short of helping these women out because it's such a kind of a Wild West situation out there with the internet and social media. You have to think about it going back 10 years, and these influencers who are doing well, all of a sudden their lives get turned upside down because this person is impersonating them and befriending photographers and getting these photos of them and different things like that. And it's really messed up. I think if you look back at things like The Tinder Swindler or Don't F with Cats or those kind of documentaries that I've said, Dave, this reality is stranger than fiction. You're going to find the same thing happens in this case as well. But of course, at the very end, you know, these victims, these women are not victims. They're strong. They come together. They put a case against him and cause change in that region of England to really help these victims of these stalkers and people that are impersonating them on the internet and shut them down, and he goes to jail for like 8 years. So
and this is very similar to what happened with the Tinder swindler.
that's right.
Which is an incredible documentary.
Yeah.
Is this actually a documentary, or is it a docu-series?
It's a documentary series. It's only 2 episodes, so it's a 2-parter. So and here's the thing. So they make you understand a little bit about the background of the stalker. Not to say that they make him a sympathetic figure, because apparently he has autism or is on the spectrum, or and has a hard time relating this, that, and the other. This lawyer had made mention, this is the lawyer's words, because he has social anxiety and some problems with cues, does not make it right for this person to continually go on and impersonate these people, ruin these people's lives, ruin the people that they're interacting with. Like he basically impersonated this woman's father, and right before this other woman was getting married, had stirred up the pot, saying that this person slept with his father and trying to break up the wedding before it happened. Like, this is unbelievable stuff. So if documentaries, I love documentaries on there, and this is just another fascinating tale. And probably also a cautionary tale as well of the ills of social media and being on there and sharing too much. But it is a fascinating story. So please check out Can I Tell You a Secret? It's an easy watch, and the good guys overcome this time. So I'm happy about that. Anyway,
all right.
Let us know what you've been watching in an upcoming episode. We'll check it out and maybe leave a review in an upcoming episode.
Skull Rock Podcast, ripped from the headlines. It's Skull Rock Podcast headline news.
Dave, Sony is taking over Disney's new and existing home video business. This is quite interesting.
Well, something the home entertainment, home video business has shrunk so much that why not just consolidate and get an economy of scale with some other studios and just let that run, until some future generation discovers cool DVDs and Blu-rays.
Yeah.
Right. Like they rediscovered vinyl records, so, but there's still a home entertainment business. There's still people that do buy DVDs and have collections. And, I think, hey, why not?
Physical media is cool, Yeah. I think another thing is cool, Dave, is how Marvel is quietly retooling amid superhero fatigue. This was a big article this week. I don't necessarily think that it's superhero fatigue as much as it is crap fatigue. I think people want great stories, and they're just not doing it. And the casual fan.
They tried to do too much stuff in a short period of time, and they stretched themselves too thin. And the result was they turned out crappy content.
That's right. Well, I think we're going past it. Marvel's Kevin Feige, Marvel Studio, of course, has put the brakes on a lot of that stuff and is doing huge QC, quality control. But, if the numbers from the Super Bowl trailer for Deadpool and Wolverine are indicative of what they're doing to set the pace, the proper pace, 365 million views in 24 hours, Dave, that is huge numbers. Just about broke the internet. And they're going back, and they want to bring back the Fantastic Four with Pedro Pascal as the lead, as Mr. Fantastic. I think this is good news for the studio, who needs a win. The casual fan with Madam Web is blaming Marvel, and it's like, look, that studio is Sony. They're putting out crap with the Marvel name. I think it's ruining the brand.
Well, I told you last week, Madam Web was a horrible film. It was a laughable, terrible film. Don't waste your money on it. But I do feel like, for Marvel to step back a little bit and take a more measured pace. This year, the only Marvel movie coming out, from what I understand, is going to be Deadpool and Wolverine.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's it. And I think that's fantastic. And then, maybe next year you have one or two. And that's what you should be doing. You shouldn't have a superhero movie coming out every quarter of the year. It's just too much.
Yeah, well, It's got to be good. That's all we got to say. It's got to be good.
That's
Make
all.
it
It's
good.
got to be good.
And take your time with the special effects, okay? Don't kill yourself.
And don't do what DC does.
Oh yeah,
which is crappy special effects.
Yeah, don't do it, guys. Don't do it. Inside Disney's Shadow of Succession game, Dave, we've been talking about this for a while. You know, Dana Walden undertakes major shakeup at ABC News with the hopes to stabilize the unit and showcase her mettle as a decision maker in Bob Iger's empire. We talked about Dana Walden a little bit. I've talked about her. And this is big news in the Hollywood Reporter. Dave, what could this mean of these moves behind the scenes?
Look, there's going to be jockeying behind the scenes, and there's a lot of speculation in town. I just think they need to let it play out. I think the important thing is that it's done in a measured way. It's done thoughtfully, and the reins of the company are turned over to somebody who can actually take it out for the next 10 years. Mm-hmm. That's what I think. And we'll just see what happens. There's going to be these articles popping up from time to time until Bob names his successor. And I still think we're a little ways off from that. But you know what? It's fun for people to be chattering about it around the water cooler.
It seems like Dave still has a lot of fires to put out before he names somebody.
Oh, yeah. I think Bob does have he's got a lot to do this year, and I think he's doing it. I mean, look, that's all I can say is I think he's doing it.
Well, speaking about fires, Fubo TV files a $1 billion lawsuit seeking to block Disney, Warner Brothers, and Fox Sports streaming platform. This antitrust lawsuit takes issue with companies forcing Fubo TV to carry expensive non-sports channels. This kind of bundling or team up, if you will, of these media giants can be viewed as somewhat of a monopoly, can it not?
I mean, look, the courts are going to wind up settling this dispute, but David Zaslav, the CEO of Time Warner, or I should say Warner Brothers Discovery, not Time Warner, Warner Brothers Discovery. He came out and during the earnings this past week for Warner Brothers Discovery, he said this was going to be sort of consumer friendly. This bundle. So, I will believe that when I see it. There needs to be some guardrails in here to protect the consumers and also, give access to these smaller streamers like Fubo.
Yeah, it's very weird, this licensing deal that they have to have all the sports content on one app. Consumer friendly. I get it. I totally get it. You want the eyeballs and you want it to be as frictionless as possible so that people get their sports. I get it. We'll see what happens.
Consumer friendly until it's not.
Yeah, that's right. Until it becomes a monopoly.
Yeah.
Speaking of reindeer games, we have one here, Borderlands. Borderlands is a great video game franchise. I've been a fan of it for many years. And there's a trailer that just was released, Dave. You sent it to me and I was like, oh my gosh, this is great. It's Cate Blanchett and Kevin Hart to dumpster fire of a world that is Borderlands. It's kind of like a post-apocalyptic world. And it really has some really cool rock and roll vibes to it, this Borderlands trailer. Eli Roth is in there as well, being a filmmaker for this particular film. And Gearbox Games, of course, is part of this. And I have friends that work at Gearbox. It's great. And guess who else is behind it? It's Avi Arad, formerly of Marvel movies, who co-produces a lot of the Spider-Man films.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see this. I was sort of on the fence after I watched the trailer, not really sure whether this is, I didn't think the trailer was I didn't think it was fantastic.
Right.
I thought it was an okay trailer that left me sort of like, I'm not sure, Yeah. I hope we see another trailer come from them that's a little better.
I think it takes advantage of the franchise for people that know, but I think for the general population, they need to really spell out what this film is about and the world that you're getting ready to look at. So do a better job of doing it, and you'll have a great hit on your hands, is my opinion.
There you go.
All right. This is good news because, movie theaters were shutting down a lot, especially post-pandemic. They just couldn't keep the doors open. But this is a good feel-good story. Jason Reitman enlists Christopher Nolan, Steven Spielberg, Bradley Cooper, and more to buy Westwood Village's theater. Dave, tell me all about this. This is big news.
Well, this is one of the premier movie theaters in Westwood Village. And I have to tell you, I've been to this theater numerous times over the years. It's a wonderful, grand movie palace. And they do a lot of movie premieres at this theater. And I'm just so glad that these filmmakers have come together and have bought this theater, and they're going to continue to it's going to continue to operate, because in Westwood, the land is so valuable. UCLA is just to the north of Westwood Village. And look, somebody could easily come in and tore this theater down and put up, a building. Yeah. But I'm so glad that these filmmakers have come in and rescued this theater. It's fantastic. If you live in the Los Angeles area and you've never seen a film at the Westwood Village Theater, you should go do it. And if you come into Los Angeles to visit, you may want to take in a film at this just to get the feel of a grand movie palace.
I think it's great that they're saving it. It's been around for 93 years. And this coalition of filmmakers is huge. I mean, this movie, the conglomerate is J.J. Abrams, Judd Apatow. You've got here Ryan Coogler, Ryan Johnson, Seth Rogen is in there, Christopher Nolan. I mean, it's a who's who. Chloe Zhao is in there.
Yeah, it's a who's who of filmmaking.
It's great. Save the art, save the history.
Yeah, it's good stuff.
Musicians and studios reach a tentative deal on contract with streaming residuals, AI gains. This is a big deal, Dave. You sent me this story, and this agreement concerns basic theatrical motion picture and basic television motion picture contracts with the American Federation of Musicians. For a long time, we've been talking about how musicians have been getting the shaft in terms of streaming rights and getting residuals from that. And I think this is a step in the right direction.
No, it absolutely is. And it's nice to see, the musicians, the American Federation of Musicians, actually come to a tentative agreement without having to go on strike the way the actors and the writers went on strike last year. I also hope that the IATSE members don't go on strike, because that's the next one. That's the next shoe to drop. And I hope they get a tentative agreement so that they can just continue making great content without having to halt production because of these strikes. So hopefully that's going to happen. But I was really thrilled to see that they had a tentative agreement without it, going to a strike.
And also the protections against the misuse of artificial intelligence. So that's a nice little tag on that conversation as well. So good stuff.
Absolutely.
Tyler Perry, movie mogul, puts $800 million studio expansion on hold after seeing OpenAI's Sora. He says jobs are going to be lost as a result. Once again, AI coming in, hard. And Tyler Perry's like, I think I'm going to put a pause on this until we figure this out.
Yeah, this is a major deal, Aljon. And I just want the folks that listen to our podcast that are in the industry to take note of these stories, because AI is going to have a massive impact on our industry, on the entertainment industry. And people need to be prepared for that. You need to figure out where you're going to fit in. And as I said last week, do you have a 6-month or a 12-month emergency fund set aside to cover your expenses? Because you could lose your job overnight. And I'm not being a fear monger. I'm just telling you that when you read these stories and you read all these other stories about AI, and you're actually seeing what these AI programs can do, you have to sit there and say, how do I stay ahead of this curve? How do I stay, involved in the industry, but evolve your skill set so that maybe you can use some of these tools and put your artistic abilities and skills to work with these tools? But if you just are sitting there doing your 9 to 5 and not thinking about this stuff, you may have a rude awakening at some point in the future. So I'm just putting it out there,
No,
John.
the industry's taking note, and so should our listening audience. AI is
Yeah,
real.
and I speak from experience because I was in animation. I am in animation, and I saw the changes coming with with digital technology coming into animation and the transition from hand-drawn animation to CG, and how you are going to deal with that. I saw people who just kept their heads down and didn't think about it, and one day they came into work and they got laid off, and a whole swath of animation jobs were gone.
Yes.
And a lot of those people never worked again in the industry.
That's right. Well, Tyler Perry sees it coming, and he wants to give Hollywood people some Hollywood jobs, get people to work, but he's putting it on pause.
Yeah.
Well, this week we had some tremendous losses in the industry. Let's start first with Ewan McIntosh, who played accountant Keith in Ricky Gervais's The Office. He passes away at the tender age of 50. McIntosh, known to many as Big Keith from The Office, passed away. As Ricky Gervais mentioned on Twitter, on X. Cause of death is not immediately known, but he played Keith Bishop in The Office, and then the Netflix series reunited with Gervais in Afterlife. He's a comedic actor, has been on shows like Miranda and Little Britain. Very sad to see him pass away.
Yeah, and by the way, when you say The Office, it's the British
version of The Office. Yes,
the original version of The Office before it was Americanized and created with Steve Carell.
There you go.
The one that most people know with Steve Carell in the U.S. is essentially an offshoot of the British series, which was the original.
There's a lot of those. For
That's
sure.
Right.
Dave, this one hits home. Kent Milton, character sculptor for Aladdin, Lion King, and Coraline, dies at 68. He helped fuel Disney's animation renaissance in the 1990s, then worked on stop-motion films for Leica Studios. This gentleman, did you work with him?
I knew him. I had talked with him a number of times over the years. I didn't know him very well. Super talented guy, though. His maquettes. When we work on animated films, once the characters are designed, there's generally somebody, and it was Kent from the early 90s forward, who would take the 2D character designs and create what's called a maquette, a sculpture in 3D of the character in a pose that really, when you looked at the character maquette, it told you what that character was about. He really captured the essence of the character in those sculptures, and just an incredibly talented guy, a very nice guy from the conversations I had with him over the years. It's very sad. I wish we had an opportunity to have him on the show to talk about what he was doing, but he was ill the last couple years. And it's just it was very sad to see this story. And, my condolences go out to his friends and his family.
Milton died Thursday at his home in Stone County, Missouri, of Lewy body dementia. Family members told The Hollywood Reporter. He sculpted in clay, one of the very few key players there that still did it. He was, of course, a powerhouse in helping Leica Studios become a stop-motion powerhouse. Just a very, very sad story.
Yeah, very talented
guy. Pamela Salem, Miss Moneypenny, and Never Say Never Again, dies at the age of 80. The actress, also known for Doctor Who, had worked in EastEnders, Into the Labyrinth, and Gods and Monsters. You may not know her name, but you definitely know her face once again. Never Say Never Again was quite a different type of James Bond film, one that was not done under United Artists, had Sean Connery come back as James Bond. It was his final turn as James Bond, and Miss Moneypenny is just a great role that she was able to kind of portray for that film.
And a great character.
Yeah, it's a great character. Absolutely. Yeah. She passed away Wednesday in Surfside, Florida, according to Big Finish Productions, who she participated in doing several audio productions. So she was able to transition there later in her role. But,
she had a vibrant career, both in front of the camera and behind, doing voiceover and audio recordings, audio books.
The thing is about playing roles in these James Bond films is that you will be a member of that family and that franchise forever. These films are just classic, all-time classics. And I remember Never Say Never Again being a great film growing up, a very different James Bond film for sure. And she will be missed. So rest in peace for sure. All right, Dave, let's sit back and relax and enjoy part one of this great interview with animator producer Joe Haidar right here on Skull Rock Podcast.
Let's do it.
Become a supporter of Skull Rock Podcast with small monthly donations to help sustain future episodes for just 99 cents a month. You can do that just like Lindsay and Joshua. Thank you so much for your support of our show. Be sure to click our link to support the show at skullrockpodcast.com/support.
Skull Rock Podcast. Interview time.
Well, Al John, once again, we have another fantastic guest. We've got animator, storyboard artist, and sometime director, Joe Haidar. Joe, welcome to the Skull Rock Podcast.
Thanks, Dave. Good to be here.
And, as always, our studio audience goes wild. Hey, Joe, it's really great to have you. And it's been a long time coming because I know you and I talked last year and, we saw each other at the 35th anniversary of Who Framed Roger Rabbit during the summer. And then we saw each other at CTN and I kept saying, yeah, we're going to get to you. It's sort of the backlog of all of our guests, and we do eventually get to everybody. But I'm thrilled to have you on the show. And one of the questions I always start out with, and if you've listened to the show, you've probably heard me say this a number of times. How did you get into animation?
Right. And this is going to sound a little like Chris Bailey because it was comic books. Comic books were my gateway drug to all of this stuff, which was really interesting because over the years I discovered my generation of animators were not into comic books. Again, why Chris Bailey and I are good friends because that bonded us early on. But yeah, as a child, I loved comic books, superhero stuff, and drew it consistently. And, and as an immigrant, I'm from Canada, and we immigrated to Canada. At the time, I couldn't even speak a word of English. So comic books got me through that really rough period where I could connect with other kids because I was the only guy who could draw Superman and Batman without looking.
Did when you were first off, where did you come from to Canada?
From Lebanon.
From Lebanon, okay. And you couldn't speak English. Did comic books help you learn English?
They sure did.
Yeah.
It's so funny. I've talked to Kirk Wise, and I've talked about this because we both have learned a lot of big words that we didn't know when we were kids. Words like imposter and chameleon and things, just invulnerable words that just you would never learn when you're 9 years old or 10 years old in your regular speech. But it helped me like you wouldn't believe.
And just by reading comic books, were you leaning in any direction? Was it Marvel? Was it DC? Was it other types of comic books?
Certainly loved DC because that was my first real exposure to comic books, so Superman, Batman, that kind of thing. But I then learned to love Marvel quickly as well. But everything was decided by my allowance, and since my allowance couldn't get me both Marvel and DC, every week was Sophie's choice. I had to leave somebody behind, and it was really hard to do it. But Spider-Man was probably the one I could never leave behind in the Marvel world. I kind of couldn't let DC go either. So, it was always, every week was definitely a challenge to make 25 cents or 30 cents or 50 cents, stretch.
Yeah, yeah. And did when you were reading comic books, were you thinking to yourself, I want to do this for a living? And how did that thread bring you into the animation realm?
Well, yeah, it's a weird thing. At the time, I didn't know comic books were done by human beings. I mean, you're just a kid, you're reading them. But then one comic artist would jump out at you all the time who does, let's say, a cover. And you're like, I really like this. And then one day you see a signature at the bottom of the book. And then you hang out with your friends who also like comic books. And we realize, oh my God, that guy's name is Neil Adams. And every one of his drawings like blows me away. So, or this guy's Jack Kirby. So I started to realize, oh my God, these things were done by real human beings. But animation, I did not get that. I loved animation, but it never occurred to me that real human beings did this, which kids today would go like, what are you, nuts? Like, how do you not know that? Well, in the 70s, there was like nothing that would have ever told you behind the scenes unless you really, really knew where to dig.
Right.
So I loved Disney. I loved, the Flintstones. I loved all that stuff, but it just never looked like a career path because I just couldn't connect it to a human being. Whereas I could with comic books, but along the way, being an immigrant, my mom just would never have accepted me doing comic books. So in Canada, you could, at the time, you could go for 5 years of high school. So you go to the 13th grade if you want to. So
that's like some community colleges in the U.S.
Right. It was a stepping stone to university in Canada as opposed to college, which they made a distinction about. But at any rate, I stayed in high school as long as I could because I was just like petrified. I couldn't figure out how to turn, drawing into a career until one day I ran into my art teacher in the hallway. We were chatting and I had just told him, hey, last night I saw this movie. It was really amazing. And it was actually the Fleischer's Gulliver's Travels. Yeah. And I was like blown away by the human realistic animation, which I didn't know was rotoscoped. So he said, hey, you should go to Sheridan College. They teach animation. And, just to put a fine point on that, in the 70s, the word animation was not a household word. You only saw the word animation in the TV guide. If it said it's an animated movie, that's where I learned that word. Sure. Otherwise, we just referred to it as cartoons.
Yeah.
And then I just thought, oh my God, I went to Sheridan, looked at it and thought, oh my God, they're teaching film. They're teaching, people who draw to get into film and animate. So the whole thing just kind of blew my mind. And that little tiny passing in the hallway thing changed my whole life and direction.
And Sheridan was at that time one of the preeminent animation programs really in the world. I mean, you had Cal Arts, you had Sheridan, you had a few other schools, School of Visual Arts down in New York. There was a couple places around the world where you could study animation as a curriculum. But in Canada, it was Sheridan College. And a lot of our contemporaries who are Canadian went through that Sheridan College animation program.
Exactly. I mean, pretty much all Canadians from my generation went through Sheridan. It was either Sheridan or Cal Arts if you're an American.
Yeah, exactly. And so you applied and got accepted.
Right.
And Sheridan was also similar to Cal Arts in that they only let in so many students each year, right? I
didn't have a hard time getting in, but I'm sure they turned people away. And I certainly found out from some of our mutual friends who had to struggle to get in. But I got in fairly easily, and it was really good. Unfortunately, the program back then was geared towards National Film Board of Canada. So most of the sensibility of the program was to kind of make you a short filmmaker for the National Film Board. While we were exposed to Disney a lot, I just never quite learned enough about the Disney style of doing things. So you kind of got the basics, but it was good. 3 years of that was enough, and then off you went.
And off you went where?
So there's a big studio in Toronto called Nelvana that's still around today, and that was like the biggest and only studio back then, just about. I tried to get in there, but I couldn't. So my friends, as I said, we were all into comic books, and there's a big comic book store in downtown Toronto called the Silver Snail. And my buddies were all working there, said, come and work here because everybody in the industry passes through here. So I went and worked at the Silver Snail for a year. And then I got a connection to my first job in Ottawa, and boom, off I went, which turned out to be the Care Bears. So the second time that the Care Bears ever appeared in anything was this sort of Care Bears movie that was being done in Ottawa. And so anyway, I did that and learned a lot, but it wasn't, it just wasn't to my liking at all.
Was that the Care Bears Battle the Freeze machine?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody has Google. Yeah. And, it was limited animation, and a lot of animators we were being paid by the foot. So a lot of guys were kind of finding shortcuts. They would run to the Xerox machine. It wasn't the kind of thing that I really wanted to do. So, when that ended, I was just like, things in Canada just didn't look that great. And then a couple of guys I knew were heading off to England, and they had already been to Europe once before and worked in Spain. And now we're going to check out London. And they were the Chassons, if you remember, Roger.
Oh, yeah. Roger Chasson. Yeah.
And his brother Claude was from my class, and they invited me to join them. And I'm so grateful for that. That was certainly a life-changing thing. So I did fly out to England with like barely any money. And I met Claude at the station, who took me to a bed and breakfast. We threw my stuff in. I took my resume the day I landed and went to all the little boutique studios in the West End of London.
Yeah,
1984. And it was just, without knowing it, we made the absolute right move, because London was the hotbed of animation in the early 80s and mid 80s. And it was just like all these boutique studios everywhere, and they're all within walking distance of each other. And I had a job the next day.
Yeah, I mean, you had Pizzazz Studios, you had Richard Williams Studio, the Purdums, I think, had a studio, right? So, yeah,
a lot of us Canadians started out at a studio called Animation Partnership, which was a producer of an old producer from Richard Williams who broke off, and he formed a partnership with another animator named Tony White. So the two of them formed a studio called Animation Partnership. And they hired a lot of us Canadians, and it was great. It was a really good place to begin.
And what were you working on? Were you doing like commercials? Was that mostly what it was commercials? It
was purely commercials, and commercials were all over the world. So every studio had its own style. So ad agencies would go from studio to studio for a specific style, and they were doing commercials for everything. Unlike like over here, where it's just mostly breakfast cereal, over there you were doing commercials for beer, for condoms, for whatever. They were all multiple styles, and it was very, very diverse. And you just go from studio to studio. You kind of just freelance, and we'd all end up in the pub pretty much every day. And is that's that one pub, right? That's sort of a mecca for the animation community in London. I don't know if it still is. I haven't been to it in probably, I don't know, it's got to be 10 or 15 years. I mean, I've been to London a number of times since then, but I haven't gone to that pub. Right. Yeah. Well, there's a few, but the one in the West End was the Green Man that we all went to. But I think when we were in London, you and I, we were in Camden Town, and that was a different pub.
Well, that was, what was it, the Edge of the World?
I can't
The
remember.
world, well, the world's. It was either the edge of the world or the world's end. It was that pub that was right in on the
Right.
high street in Camden Town. Yeah.
Yeah. But if and I don't drink, by the way. I mean, I've never drank in my life, and I don't smoke. But if you want a social life in London, you got to go to the pub.
Right.
And if you want to work, you got to go to the pub to find out when, where the next gig is. So
Yeah.
I quickly learned you got to go to the pub. I buy around for everybody else. I buy my little orange juice. I sit on it, and you chat with everybody until everybody gets so drunk that you can't talk to them anymore. And then you slink off. But that was pretty much how I did it for 4 years. Learning where the next commercial is coming up at whatever studio.
Yeah.
And
I'd be curious to know if anybody's listening in England, if that pub is still the central place to meet up, or has it moved somewhere else? Somebody should send us an email.
Yeah. And of course, through the grapevine, you hear that this big movie is coming with Disney and Spielberg, and called Roger Rabbit. And at that point, I had only worked on commercials. I was kind of doing mostly assistant work, and I was desperate to become an animator. So Eric Goldberg gave me my first shot at his studio, Pizzazz Pictures. And I got to animate a commercial that he laid out for a bunch of us young people to try. And it worked out pretty well. And I was able to launch into Roger Rabbit from there. And back then there were no recruiters or anything. I mean, it was literally, I just heard at the pub, here's a phone number. You can call this guy named Don Hahn and get a meeting. And we ended up, Don looked at my work and And he said, well, you don't have enough experience as an animator, but we'll bring you in as an assistant or cleanup. But, we'll see if the cream rises kind of thing.
Oh,
that's
almost fair enough, though, right?
Yeah. No, it's very fair. And I'm so glad I said yes to it because I was almost going to say no. But I really, really wanted to work on it. And, Richard Williams was a legend at that time, even then. And I had never worked with him at his studio, but I used to see him in Soho Square all the time. And, people are like, there's Rich. I mean, he was a big celebrity and I was very intimidated, but I thought, I got to work with this guy. So I jumped in and I ended up being Phil Niblink's assistant right away. And on Roger, it was, clearly a very difficult movie, very challenging, and really only a few people had the chops to do it. And, a lot of you guys from the US, Chuck Gamage and a couple of other Canadians, Roger Chasson. But the rest of us were still kind of green and for a movie like that under Richard Williams. So it was a struggle. Initially, Dick wouldn't give me a chance to animate. I tried to stay late at night and do a test and everything, and he wouldn't look at it. There's a whole story behind that. But so Phil Niblink felt sorry for me and sort of called me over and said, hey, let's do these little background characters. I'm going to give you these little background characters to animate for me. And then so we did a whole bunch of scenes that way. We never told Dick. He kept approving them. And then one day Phil called me over and said, we got to tell Dick. And I was scared out of my mind. And I just said, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen. So you remember he had that office with the glass window, you could see through it. Yeah. So I saw the two of them talking. I couldn't tell what was going on, but I started seeing Dick's head just kind of nodding and everything. And then Phil came out and said, you're an animator now. And that was it. I was just like, it was incredible. And we worked 7 days a week. Like I was on that movie for 13 months. I never took a weekend off, just about. But I knew I was not good enough to be on that movie, but it was an incredible opportunity. So I just worked my ass off trying to power through it and learn as much as I could, as you do when you're pretty young. But and Dick was, super, super scary, very intimidating. I don't remember. Did you ever have any?
Yeah, no, I had plenty of interactions with Dick, and yeah, I mean, you know, he could, you know, really go off on a tangent, and you know, raise his voice, and you know, especially when somebody says, I remember distinctly there was one moment where somebody said, they don't want us to do such and such, and he just went off on who they were in air quotes. Who are they? Who are they? You know, it was just
He was.
or his famous "Life is on ones" with his eyes popping out of his head, right? You know.
Yep. Yep.
You know, by the way, I don't know if you felt this way, but I back then thought he was probably one of the greatest living animators, still working. You know.
Absolutely. I mean, Roger Rabbit was a real turning point. I mean, I had seen great animation before. I mean, I'd seen Eric Goldberg's animation at Pizzazz and Oscar Grillo at his studio, and those guys were incredible. But they were doing commercials, and commercials only allow a level of acting and whatever, you know, that's just, you know, that much. But when I came on to Roger Rabbit, and it was my first feature, and I'm seeing the level of work that's being done consistently by everybody, and the Dick stuff was just, you know, unbelievable. And I realized, holy crap, the bar is so high. And you remember Russell Hall was doing Jessica Rabbit.
Yeah, yeah.
And Jessica just blew my mind. I mean, I'm 26 years old, and you're looking at this kind of unbelievably, you know, sexy girl animation that is really difficult to do. And the guy's doing it, who's like in his 40s back then, chain smoking and just super quiet. And, you know, we used to sneak into his office at night because he had all these girly printouts on all over the walls. He had, you know, soft porn printouts of naked women running on the beach so that he could kind of study overlap and whatnot. So it was a fun room to go and hang out in. But yeah, it was like the first time I realized there's a level of dedication here that I had never, ever really seen before. So it really, you know, turned the burners on. And from there, you know, that brought me to LA. And then I saw another level, which just about blew my mind, was coming to, you know, I came on to Rescuers Down Under, and first Little Mermaid had just finished. So I went to the wrap party and saw how amazing that was. And then, you know, we were on Rescuers, and, you know, being exposed to guys like Glenn Keane and James Baxter, who I'd already seen what he could do in London. And he just, you know, he was a prodigy that just came in the last 2 or 3 months of the movie, if you remember, and just blew everybody away at the age of 19.
Yeah.
So there was all this like feeling that it's like, God, you got to like really work to keep up with all of this. And then when I came to LA, and everybody's pretty much your age, and they're all amazing, and some of them have been there many years, and you're just kind of arriving, still trying to figure out, you know, how to drive in LA, which was another story. But so it was a lot to take in. And then Rescuers, you know, was a fun movie to work on, but there were a few things I needed to learn. And Hendel Butoy was really great. He took me under his wing and spent a little time with me to, you know, just teaching me how to better prepare my work for animation, you know, thumbnailing and thinking more about it. Because I was very much a trial and error kind of animator up until that point. So Hendel really grounded my thinking and was able to help me work in the system over there. And again, it was a different kind of movie than Roger, obviously. So there was a lot to sort of, and we all had to follow the 9 Old Men because they did the first movie, and we had to learn, you know, so much about acting from that film. So quite a large, you know, rock to roll up the hill. But anyway, a great experience. Mike and Hendel were fun to work with. Initially, we had a rocky start, but then it went very well after that.
I know we're moving forward, but I just want to step back for 1 second because when you were on Who Framed Roger Rabbit, tell me, what was going through your head as far as like, living in London. Was it fairly easy for a Canadian to go to London and work because you were part of the Commonwealth, or?
Yeah, I found out that if you're under the age of 27, they allow you 2 years of to come and live and work and travel so that you can pick up odd jobs and finance a trip through Europe.
Okay.
A lot of us who were under 27 used that to get over there and stay there for a while. And then Roger Rabbit got me a proper visa. So that was great. But my ever since I was in Canada, I desperately wanted to go to California. Even in my black and white TV and watching, beach blanket bingo movies and Elvis Presley movies and whatever, yeah. I was so depressed by the Canadian winters, coming from the Middle East where I never had to walk in, knee-high snow just to get to school. And the winters just beat me down so much. And I just thought there's this magic place called California. I want to be there. They have palm trees and just about every show I watched was, shot here. So everything from Adam 12 to Emergency to, Chips.
Sure.
Yeah. And it was just like, I got to go to this place.
But, you're in London, you're working on Who Framed Roger Rabbit. What was one of the most memorable things about being on Who Framed Roger Rabbit for you?
Oh, my God. There was some of the memories were a little bit rough. I mean, Dick yelling at me is one that will always stay in my mind because he didn't like the way I numbered my drawings. Had this Baby Herman scene, which he had laid out for all of us younger animators. And I was numbering B1, B2, B3, and he went on a tirade for like an hour about how Milt would number at 1B or 2B and what, I don't know, it was something like that. And I literally had to stand there in his office while he yelled at me and looking at my exposure sheet. And then finally he sort of says, "Have you shot this?" And I said, "Yeah." So, we walked over to the video room to look at it. And I was just thinking, this is the end of me. Once he sees this, it's over. And then he kind of leans in, looks at it, plays it a couple of times. "Oh, that's good. Keep it up." And he walked out. And I melted, and I was just like, I just didn't understand. I didn't understand. I mean, that's always been my problem is I never really understand authority. Like, to me, everybody should just be nice and normal. And I never understand this kind of behavior. So I literally had to kind of tell myself, no matter what Richard Williams says again, never react to it. Never, ever, ever. So another time he saw my work and he loved it. And he was like, we were in the middle of a meeting with Bob Zemeckis and it wasn't about my work. It was just Bob was talking about stuff and he interrupted Zemeckis and said, "Hey, Bob, did you see Joe Scene, what he did with the weasel and everything?" And Zemeckis said, "Oh, no, it's great. And he just kept talking. And I was just going, I don't know what's happening here, but, it's just too Jekyll and Hyde for me. So I just told myself, do not get fired. Just hang on and try to just take the ride. And I'll never forget at the Radio City Music Hall. Were you there for the premiere?
No, I wasn't at Radio City Music Hall I'm trying to remember why. There was some reason why I wasn't there.
Anyway, we all obviously were invited if we wanted to go there. And, I had my Roger Rabbit brochure or whatever with all the things, and I got everybody to sign it, and Dick signed it, and I still have it. And he said, "Joe, was it worth it?" And, he totally understood. I went through hell on that movie. And, I have to say, yes, it was, because it changed my life and the direction that of my career and everything.
And from there, you left London and came out to Los Angeles. Did you come out specifically to start working at Disney?
So, yeah, this is this is going to be hard to believe, but this is what happened. While we were at the end of Roger, Max Howard was making a trip to LA, and he asked a bunch of us, if you're interested in going to Los Angeles, I will take your portfolio to the review board. So we all gave him our portfolios, and he went, he came back, he gave me back my portfolio. There was nothing written in it. So I just assumed I was rejected. And then I took a position, an animation position in Germany on a small movie. And I accepted that gig thinking I have nothing to go on to after Roger. So I went home that summer and I got a phone call from Nick Ranieri. And Nick was already on Little Mermaid. And he said, Joe, I saw your name. You're supposed to be here working on the Little Mermaid. And I'm going, dude, nobody told me anything. And he went and told Bill Matthews. Bill Matthews called me up and said, yeah, sorry, they dropped the ball. You're supposed to be here. And then Bill Dennis called me up and we made a deal. And then I came to work initially on the Little Mermaid, but by the time I got there, it was almost over. So I just went pretty much to Rescuers Down Under.
And you started talking a little bit about Rescuers Down Under and working with Haidar, Haidar taking you under his wing and working on that picture. Can you talk a little bit more? Like what unit were you in? Who were you working with?
Yeah, I mean, I think back then on that movie, we weren't on any specific unit. Like I was on the mice. So with Tony DeRosa, Ruben Aquino, who was doing Jake.
Yeah.
So whatever mice shots came up. But, I'm a very intuitive animator. I realize over the years, I'm not a technical animator. I kind of really animate from the gut. So it took me a while to kind of bring that technical thing into my work. And that first step was when Haidar said, are you, thumbnailing these? And I'm like, what's thumbnailing? He kind of showed me how to thumbnail, and I'm so grateful to that. So it helped me transition to that movie. But, it was a bit of a blur because it was my first movie there. There's a lot to understand about working there. I initially got put on too early, and I was sitting next to Kevin Lima, who was doing character design and storyboards. And so bizarre now that I think about it. And I guess I was supposed to do test animation, but I didn't know what test animation was. So no one really explained it to me. I think Mike said, hey, just do some kangaroos or something. And I'm like, I don't know. What do you mean? Just animate a kangaroo anyway, I didn't understand the whole ethos at Disney about test animation and development work or any of that stuff. So back then, nobody explained anything to anybody. So you were just kind of left to figure it out. So by the time the movie got started, I wasn't really impressing anybody. So, that's when Haidar and I had a meeting of the minds. And then he sort of took me on for a month and then kind of got me rolling. So it was a bit of a bumpy ride. And then we had just arrived in LA. I had a brand new baby. My daughter was just born in England. So she was a month old. And so I'm dealing with a whole brand new city, a wife from England who neither one of us had ever been here before. So, trying to adjust to all of the realities of living here. And by the way, I had just learned how to drive. I didn't drive before I came to LA.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, I mean, is that kind of the norm up in Canada?
No.
Or, is it because there's great transportation or what?
Yeah, there's great public transportation. I had no desire to learn how to drive. So I let that pass. That was a mistake. My father passed away when I was very young. So there was no man around to sort of say, dude, you better get your license. Yeah. And I had my head in comic books and fantasy worlds and drawing. So the realities of life were kind of very blurry to me. So,
how old were you when you got your driver's license?
28.
Really? Wow, that you know what? That's like my father. My father didn't get his driver's license until he was 28 because he grew up in Greenwich Village in Manhattan, and there was no need to have a car,
Right. And then living in England, oh my God, I would never drive in England.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just never occurred to me. But, for all the young kids out there, don't let it slide. Try to get your license by the time you're 18, 19, because otherwise you're going to end up doing what I was trying to do, which is try to be in a brand new city where Disney gave me a car, for a few months in my relocation package.
Yeah.
And I just barely got my license in Toronto before I got there. So I could.
Wow.
So suddenly I'm like still learning how to drive. I have a baby in the car, a wife in LA where I don't know anything. And by the way, I got to go to work every day and compete with the best artists in the world. It was a tall order at that time. And so Rescuers that's what I remember about Rescuers.
Wow.
Just, but did you talk to Chris Bailey about the Paula Abdul video?
Yeah, we touched on that briefly, but why don't you dive into it? That's one of those small projects that stood out from the time period. And I don't believe I did anything on that, but I knew a number of people who did work on it.
Yeah, I mean, there was a point in Rescuers when the story had to be revamped, and of course, animators were sitting around with nothing to do. And Chris, God love him. He came, he had this project on the side and he handed it out to all of us. And we all ended up animating 1 or 2 shots in that video, which just cracks me up because, we're all just sitting during the day on our desks drawing this scat cat. But it gave us something to do.
It was training. It was still training,
And, that's when I kind of really got to know Chris a bit. And, that was the weird thing too, is just the fact that when I arrived in LA and found out 90% of my fellow animators couldn't give a crap about comic books. It was just very, very weird to sort of realize, oh shit, my sort of the thing that got me here it means nothing to these people.
Because like most of the guests we have on this show, many of whom as well as I do, right? They sort of had the same thing. They watched cartoons on television, growing up, and occasionally went to see a Disney feature re-release in the theaters or a new feature in the theaters,
right. And I did all of that, but I never drew the animated characters.
Right.
I always drew the superhero stuff. And that's, sort of how I learned to draw. So, and that was kind of a bit of a crutch for me as well, because transitioning from comic books to animation, there's a style change you have to do, which I had to figure out for myself. But it was just interesting that, other than Chris Bailey and Larry White, I didn't really know anybody else there who had read a comic book the way I did. So, it was another thing that kind of made me feel, oh God, I'm in alien world here. So I had to do a lot of catching up and learn a lot about the history of the studio, the 9 Old Men, which I already knew a little bit, but, nowhere near as much as the rest of those guys did. And, I went to the morgue and would look at a lot of, when it was called the morgue back in the day. And you can literally pick up the old drawings and flip them and Xerox them.
The morgue, which is now the Animation Research Library, and the folks that work there bristle when you say morgue.
Oh, sorry. But
by the way, do you think comic books are still relevant today?
Well, they certainly are, because I mean, we're on the downturn when it comes to movies, but just about every IP now comes from comic books, and ones that you would never think of, like, oh my God, there was a Tom Hanks movie, Road to Perdition. Did you know Road to Perdition? Yeah. That was a comic book. That was a graphic novel. So, it's a different art form, but there is a Venn diagram where animation and comic books meet, and you have to know it if you're going to work in both areas. Which I didn't. I just kind of sleepwalked my way through comic books and then sleepwalked my way through animation and then realized, oh crap, I really don't know how to do hair the way animation people know how to draw hair. So I had to kind of like relearn my basic drawing style to adjust to animation. But it was a real jolt.
But you were willing to do it though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously.
But yeah, I mean, storyboarding, the two things there, they meet very well. I mean, comic books don't use camera the way a storyboard artist does, but you could certainly apply a lot of the techniques of comic books into storyboarding, especially today, because things have gotten way more cinematic. Whereas back in the day when we were there, storyboards were a little bit more about telling the story and less about the camera. That's all changed.
Sure.
So
the story artist has to, in some sense, be a cinematographer, right?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have to back in the 90s because there was the pass that's done by the layout artist.
Sure.
Workbook, and the workbook restages the storyboards to be more cinematic. But now storyboard artists have to do all of that themselves. Mm-hmm. The camera kind of has to be in the forefront from the get-go. So it's sort of changed. And comic books have pretty much also become more of a proving ground for a series. They're all trying to get bought as a series or as a feature. So the comic book artists are all now working more as storyboards for live action. So it's kind of taken that route, which I find sad because there was an art form to just doing comic books in the Silver Age that was purely a comic book way of laying out pages and panels that didn't really try to emulate film. So today I kind of mostly go back and buy old comics. I do buy the new ones, but I mostly just like to go back and look at the books that I had when I was a kid.
Do you feel like the comic books has evolved into more graphic novels, longer form?
Yeah.
Today than they were when you were, sort of eating them up in the 70s?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing that I think what happened is in the late 70s, the specialty comic book store happened. Before you bought your comic books in the smoke and gift shop or the 7-Eleven or whatever.
The five and dime, yeah, right. That the corner candy store.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then when it became a specialty store, and that was right around the time I was like 17 or 18, they started to become more and more sophisticated because guys like me wanted to see more intensity to the stories. So in the 80s, they became very dark and just kept getting darker and darker and darker. And they kind of forgot that we have a younger audience coming in every now and then, and let's do something for that audience. They were catering to the older collectors to the detriment of bringing in younger stuff. So I kind of today, like I look at them and they're just so dark, and I'm just exhausted by them. And but the weird thing is I want to see animation get dark. I'm getting exhausted with family friendly animation. I can do it. I enjoy it. Fine. But do we have to have a steady diet of it? Whereas in comic books, it's the reverse. I'm getting tired of all of the R-rated stuff and the real extreme violence, and kind of want to see more like family friendly, cartoonier styles in comic books. So
Joe, you must really like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Aljon, I was just about to say that.
Yeah, the very first one just knocked my socks off like it did everybody else. But here's the funny story. When we were doing Hunchback of Notre Dame, I came up with the idea that we should do Spider-Man. I was watching James Baxter's animation and seeing him climbing the side of the cathedral. And I thought, damn, the Hunchback looks like Spider-Man.
Yes.
And I thought we could do Spider-Man. So I sort of threw out the idea to a bunch of people, like we should pitch the idea of doing Spider-Man. It's a great idea. It's a young guy's story. It's a coming of age. It's got the magic element of a spider. It's got a great theme, with great powers comes great responsibility. So the whole thing made sense, and everybody laughed at me and said, "Are you kidding? Disney and Marvel, you're out of your mind."
There you go, Joe. You were way ahead of your time.
1995.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, that was that shot me down right there. And going back when we were on Aladdin, Jeffrey Katzenberg opened the door for us to do the Gong Show. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So that was my first foray into pitching. And I pitched Hercules. Wow. That was an incredible experience that I had with that pitch fest, because it was Jeffrey and Michael Eisner and Roy and all the executives, Tom and Peter and everybody in a room with like 45 people or 50 people pitching.
And what'd you have, 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
Something like that, like 3 to 4 max. They would draw your name out of a hat, and we were told you pitch, and when you're done, you don't leave. You stay where you are. Nobody talks, and until the whole room has had their chance to pitch. So I was coming in with Hercules because part of it is I wanted to pitch just for the opportunity, and the other part is I was feeling like our movies were feeling very estrogen driven, and I kind of wanted to see a little testosterone coming out of our stuff. And I put together this whole pitch on Hercules. And then sitting in this room, the first person they called in was Francis Glebus, who was a storyboard artist.
Sure.
And he pitched, I think it was the Odyssey or the Iliad. I can't remember. And Jeffrey was all over him, and it looked like he was just attacking him. And, Francis was trying to talk through it and everything. And it just like, it's too big. I don't know how are you going to squeeze it? It was just, and I was just going, oh my God, this guy's getting burned. And he's doing some kind of Greek mythology, and I'm coming in with a Greek mythology. So I'm hoping like 20 people will to separate the two of us. And sure enough, the second person called was me. And I've never pitched before, and I was nervous as all hell. And I had this painting, and I was holding up the painting, trying to talk. And then Jeffrey attacked me, and he just kind of I can't even remember everything he was like hitting me with. Well, how are you going to do this? And how are you going to do that? And, I only had a very rough framework for the story. So, I just sort of said, hey, you're going to have to hire a writer. I just kind of have whatever. So I just thought, okay, this is a disaster. And I just sat down and painfully sat for the rest of the 2 hours or so of the pitch fest. And I couldn't wait to get out of there. And then 3 weeks later, we all received a letter, and they picked 5 ideas from that meeting.
And one was Pocahontas, right?
No, Pocahontas was already picked before that.
Oh, from the previous one. Okay.
Yeah.
But it was Hercules that came out of that one.
Yeah, Hercules and a bunch of other ideas that never made it anywhere. But the Iliad, or whatever Francis pitched, that was in the 5.
Oh, wow.
That was a real big lesson for me is, Jeffrey, if he likes something, he's going to attack it. If he didn't talk to you while you're pitching, he's already checked out.
Got it.
So I completely misunderstood it. There's just so many little things you have to learn beyond just animating or sitting at your, you remember Kathleen Gavin?
Sure.
Kathleen gave me the best advice ever in that place. She said, Joe, your job does not end at your desk. And it is your job to go and sell yourself to the next movie.
Yeah.
And man, that was the best advice I ever got. Because I always thought, well, hey, I've got a contract, so sure, I'll be on the next movie. And she definitely let me know that that's not a sure thing.
So, I think this is probably a good place for us to break. Joe, because we're bumping up against time. But when we come back next week, I really want to start off with sort of finishing off Rescuers Down Under, because then you went on to Beauty and the Beast and to Aladdin. So let's pick up on that next week. And with that, I'm going to say thanks for being on the Skull Rock podcast this week.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's Eddie Soto, former Disney Imagineer, welcoming you to the Skull Rock Podcast.
Your attention, please. Now loading on track number 1 for a trip around Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom.
Skull Rock Podcast.
All aboard.
Your Main Street to the world of Disney.
All right. Joe Haidar, part 1 in the books. And we've got part 2 coming up next week. Dave, so many great stories with Joe. What a great person.
Oh, absolutely. I love Joe. He's fantastic. We've always had great conversations when we run into each other. I had a chance to moderate a little presentation that it was a film that Joe had done with a friend of his, and he's going to talk about it. I think in part 2 or 3 of our interview with him. but anyway, I did that. I moderated that at the CTN Expo last November. Yeah. So he's just a terrific guy, and it was great having him on. We're going to have him back because he's got some wonderful stories to tell.
Can't wait. Looking forward to it, Dave. And thank you once again for being part of the show, listening to the very end. If you just stumbled upon our show, please be sure that you subscribe to our show on every podcast platform. And quick programming note, Google Podcast is going away. So you need to check us out on the other podcast platforms like Spotify, iHeartRadio, and of course, Apple Podcasts and so many other podcast players as well. So please do that. But Google Podcasts is going away here in a month. And we want to make sure you catch every single episode and all the episodes on our archive. Also follow us on our social media. With Dave.
I was going to say a lot of consolidation going on in the podcast realm.
There is. I think Google Podcasts is going to go to YouTube. I think everything that they're going to do media-wise is going to be based on YouTube. So there you go. Right. That's my prediction. Anyway, follow us on all the socials, Facebook, X, LinkedIn. Dave and I are both there. Also Instagram. Be sure to check out our show archive at skullrockpodcast.com and send us those emails and 5-star reviews. Dave at skullrockpodcast.com or Aljon, ALJON at skullrockpodcast.com. A lot of stuff going on. Big thanks to the Source Radio Network at srsounds.com, celebrating like 13 years of being in business, servicing the Disney fan community. Thank you for that. Dave, the final word.
Well, Aljon, this week I've got a Facebook Live event on Wednesday, February 28th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we're going to be celebrating the 80th anniversary of the Three Caballeros.
Yeah.
So tune into that. That's, again, Facebook Live, Wednesday, February 28th at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Also, you can always go to my website, davidbossert.com. There's plenty of free content there and free stuff that you can send away for. And if you're looking for some signed copies of my books, go to theoldmillpress.com, one of the sponsors of our podcast. And with that, I will say go out and have a fantastic week, everybody. Enjoy yourselves. Be good to one another. And we'll see you back here next Monday, right here on the Skull Rock Podcast.
Yeah. People are booking their vacations now, or at least planning them. And you can save time, money, and a whole heck of a lot in terms of moolah, so you can spend it on your next Disney vacation when you book with Kristen. So, Kristen.
Yes.
Our resident travel expert, tell everybody what the latest travel deal is.
You can save up to 30% on rooms at select Disney resort hotels when you stay for 5 nights or longer. And this is going to be valid for stays most nights from March 25th to July 7th. So you've got a good bit of time to be able to take advantage of this special rate. And it's going to be up to 30% on rooms that are going to be classified as your deluxe resort. So places like the Contemporary, Grand Floridian, Riviera, Yacht Club. And then you can save up to 25% on rooms that are moderate. So your Caribbean Beach, Coronado Springs, and it's Port Orleans Riverside for this. French Quarter is not included in this.
Wow.
And up to 20%, the All Stars, as well as Art of Animation, Family Suites, and Pop Century. And then up to 15% on the Polynesian Village, and up to 10% on many of the villas, as well as the French Quarter.
Awesome. Well,
and you have to, as I said before, you have to stay 5 nights in a row to take advantage of this deal.
It's always great to save money on your Disney vacation, but people are also booking their cruises with every cruise line known to man. Those super ships are a big deal, like Icon of the Seas. So yeah, go ahead, Royal Caribbean. But of course, Disney Cruise Line, Carnival, what have you. Kristen can book that as well as the other park, Universal Studios. So do yourself a favor, save time, money, and so much more when you book with Kristen. Where can people email you to have you book their next trip?
They can contact me at themeparksandcruises@gmail.com.
And tell them this podcast sent you.
Yes.